Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby. Here with me is Scott Pask, who's nominated for 2 Tony Awards this season for his scenic design of Shucked and Some Like It Hot, which is quite an achievement to have 2 in the same category, Scott. I think that brings you to 11 nominations total in your career right now. So how does it feel to be continually recognized in this way?
I mean, it is massive, and especially as you just said this year, this was we were talking before, the idea of like what we've been through over the last 3 years, and the Broadway season that we are just wrapping up feels like it feels like the first where we really kind of started it, and it's full of amazing work, and to be recognized, particularly in this year, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, I'm so excited, and to me, for 2 shows that are incredibly beloved to me, and also that were in the sort of pipeline before the pandemic, and we've been working on them for years, and for them to both kind of come up together and to be recognized for both of them, and they're so different, is a huge acknowledgement and just an incredible field of excellent work. So I'm humbled by that for sure.
Yeah, they are very different. If we start by diving into Shucked for a minute, I love that it takes a concept of, it's a barn is, the main set piece, but it has this really cool concept to it where almost is incomplete or something. It's on an angle, the slats, give it a really cool texture. What was kind of what did that aesthetic accomplish for you with that design?
I mean, I began by thinking it just like really from Robert's book. This book by Robert Horn is so funny and so great. And the idea of this flood, which figures subtly through the narrative, and you find out a lot more later on, that had been through Cobb County, that I just wanted to take this idea of community and like a literal barn raising in a way, and topple it a bit, like the idea of the foundation being kind of altered by this series of floods that have come through. So it's just a bit off kilter in the same way that the show has its own sort of, I'm going to say, off kilter sense of humor about community in itself, and this sort of protective nature of a great place, and going out to have to like leaving the boundaries of this community to save it itself. And then just kind of even throwing it on the angle. And we looked at a bunch of different degrees. It ends up being 6 degrees. It's all tilted 6 degrees, except for this one pipe that was there to replace the sort of rotted wood column. But it did start just kind of with the spirit of the show and some of the narrative points in the show itself.
Yeah. Almost kind of like with the characters in this are a little bit off in the most endearing way possible, because they're all very endearing, but they're all sort of off kilter, I think, in a way.
Absolutely. And then I think by having the structure there as a skeleton, and then the planking, which is, it looks like it's been through it, it's all kind of like, it's had a rough life, that barn, but it still has its warmth and its character, and there are moth nests up in the corners and birds' nests and things. But what we like, spacing the planks around, allows that structure to have this kind of buoyance and life and light. Most importantly, Jaffe Weidman, who did the lighting, is so brilliant, and almost treating that whole space as a gobo of sorts, and where we can really tell time of day and be able to focus into like a smaller scene, and then expand out to a broader one, and then always have the sense of the cornfields beyond. And that was important, to keep the inside and the outside ever present.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about how it interacted with lighting, because it creates a lot of really beautiful stage pictures because there's that space. In the design process, what is that collaboration like? Are you all kind of creating in tandem together to get that effect?
I mean, I sort of kick it off because I feel like the 3-dimensional environment is almost the first element out of the gate, so to speak. And then I'm closely collaborating with the director, but very quickly lighting and costume are brought in. But I felt like I needed to get a foundation first, and an idea, and then having the conversations all along about, hey, we're knocking around this idea, what you think? Because I'm quite literally blocking off in the traditional Broadway like musical form of scenery where you're like wings and borders and legs. That's sort of in our kind of vaudevillian history where you're able to enter from there and also have light come in left and right. I've blocked them by putting this barn there. But what we have done is within that structure of the barn, keeping the sort of airiness of the plank spacing, but then to make space and to create the ability for Jaffe to properly light from within, from the sides, and then from beyond. There are slots cut within that barn itself that feel like they're part of the structure. And in fact, they're more like lightning strikes in the roof. So there are these breaks in the ceiling that look like they're kind of weather induced, but they're holes where we can shoot the light through. And then left and right, the same situation. It's kind of built into the structure of the barn. And then there's a surrounding almost a box of like, that's a cyc that has the sky painted all over it, and then the corn below. And even in those, what I'll call like our sky box, that is another surround beyond the barn, there are slots in that, and one of them actually opens and closes. So when it's not being illuminated, if you don't see the dots of light, it's closed, so you don't have that sort of dark band of what it is. So it becomes a very, very close collaboration. And then especially when we're in the theater together, the idea of its transformation and how we start the show and move through it. And for me, the importance of kind of compression and expansion and meeting the space becomes incredibly articulated and just important. This is another one of the sets where, different from Some Like It Hot, where you walk in and you meet the space. So the audience is sharing that room with the onstage environment for their 30 minutes or whatever, however long they've been there. And so you kind of can like start to, I don't know, I think almost feel the community itself, and it's pushed kind of so close to them that it kind of completes the room. So those are all important aspects of lighting. In fact, the lighting that's even reflected from the auditorium into the space itself during that moment is key. And then we kind of click it on once we meet our storytellers.
Yeah, and we stay in this area for in this set for the duration, but the characters do travel. Caroline's character does travel to Florida, and I love the sort of use of just lettering with like icons of Florida to tell that journey. Why was that important to you instead of making like a brand new set?
I felt like we wanted to keep the vocabulary within the world of our characters, meaning manipulated by them, as opposed to bringing in some giant piece. It's something that is in the vocabulary of what we've been doing, but then it's transformable in the same way that like the corn walls kind of come on and then they're just quickly spun around, and all of a sudden they cut this diagonal across the space, but in like the vulgarity of these neon colors and billboard lettering and welcome to Tampa. And it's just almost like what I've done is it has sort of like a sort of high 1980s sort of like, I guess, color tonality to it, or very Miami Vice. But not to say anything about Tampa's vulgar. I'm saying we're playing with like the vulgarity of how do we throw these horrifying colors all together on this neon within a world that is made of natural elements, like of wood and timber and all these other, and just the fabrics and textures of the costumes shift so dramatically. So we're kind of embracing each other as we walk along this journey as Maisie goes from Cobb County to the big city, quote unquote.
Yeah. Well, you have another dramatic shift this season with Some Like It Hot, because it is quite different in tone. And I think it has this sort of Art Deco grandeur to your designs, but there's also just so much space on the stage too, because you do have Casey's insane dances to fill that space. So how does that, requirement affect your design?
I think you're exactly right. It's starting, the set becomes a character in Casey's brilliant choreography. Casey Nicolau, who directed and choreographed Some Like It Hot, is like just incredible. And how we began was we began thinking about how to parse out the space and how, and like what was our depth, so that we could have a kind of base space, so to speak, a crucible for the show that had this Art Deco look and the intensity of that period of time, the machine age glamour of those surfaces and metals and graphite, steel, aluminum, chrome, all of that, and then and have a bandstand present that we could be like coexisting with that band above our sort of onstage space, and then be able to fill it, our room, and then be able to quickly disperse. So the rhythm of the show is largely built around Casey's choreography and each scene's requirement.
Mm.
And yeah, that's a great observation about how different it is from something like Shucked.
Yeah, and those Art Deco elements, all the intricate designs with those lines, they all seem, are they actual sculpts? It's not just like prints on things
No, I
for
mean,
the
all
most
of the
part.
onstage architecture is sculpted for sure. But what is different is we didn't use a lot of trompe l'oeil work, the painting of like something that is flat to make it look dimensional through the use of shading. And in fact, our front curtain, which is my interpretation of like a sort of an old red curtain in a theater, or traditional like show curtain, where you've got these big deep folds and then a sort of bullion fringe at the bottom. When you walk in, you see this kind of metallic folded metal plate in a way, or a folded metal, like it looks incredibly dimensional. In fact, someone was asking about it yesterday. I said, oh, that's all painted. And they were like, no. And it's my interpretation of that curtain. And it's done with such care by our scenic artists, and the company that built that are painters for both shows, a company called Scenic Art Studios, who've been doing this for years. And to be able to shift from the amazing finishes of the barn and to really amplify the expertise of trompe l'oeil painting and surfaces and metals and the sort of Art Deco finishes was a blast. But you're right, there's a ton of sculpted work that coexists with these trompe l'oeil finishes that are part of our portals and our front curtains and some of the layers that pop in.
Yeah, provides a lot of texture on stage. And when I was talking about Casey's choreography before, you must have been responsible for all those doors that slammed. And I think we've all, we've all seen like standalone doors on stage that just look so flimsy. What is the trick to, making a non-flimsy door that has to be worked
Well,
over
I
and
hope
over?
that means that you think I solved that, but
I do. I think you solved it.
it's very tricky. We have, because for me, I want to make sure that there's enough decorative detail to make them specific. But the more weight you add to them, there is a very fine spot between being too heavy to manipulate and being too light to not have its own, not only visual gravitas, but its ability to kind of feel real. So it's a very tricky balance. So even the hotel doors, we had to kind of refine a little bit just to get the weight a tiny bit down. But no, they're great. And also just the slamming of them becomes and you're like nailing all of those things. It's a tribute to our the team of builders, our prop supervisor Buse Bickley, who did both shows, is like now our literally the door genius. So there's just a lot of thought that goes into it, and a lot of care, and also a number of workshops for the show that we had done before our production. Initially, we were going to be doing the show in Chicago before the pandemic, and so that altered all of our plans. So we had a sort of an elaborate workshop before we did the production to get a sense of the space and a sense of that cadence of rhythm of choreography and those doors. So that it takes a lot of research and development to nail it, as you said.
Yeah. I also really like the train sequences, because in a musical that is so big and broad, it forces people into really intimate scenarios. What's the challenge of creating a small space on a really big stage?
No, you're right. And I'm always kind of obsessed with expansion and contraction on stage. So we're not always living with the broad picture, that we can become intimate and get to know those characters in smaller spaces, whether it's like by focusing with lighting, in this case, taking a full stage and then having a train kind of, which is in storage at the top of the show underneath the band platform, and then is like curving around and then snakes on from one whole side all the way across the stage. And that means that feat is pretty incredible, that the crew and everyone is able to accomplish that. And I love the opportunity to do that, and the challenge of working that out. And then again, like having that part to reveal the interior, and then even go smaller by having the bathroom come on stage. So we're doing this almost like this doll inside a doll inside a doll until we like reveal the jewel of the scene between the three characters, and then we pull it apart to reveal Sugar's like during her number, to then to peel all the layers away to get into our big space at her first rehearsal in the first club. So I love being able to manipulate the space in that way and the scale of it.
Lots of drama. I should also say you're not you keep extremely busy because you were nominated for these two. You also worked just this season on 1776 and Ain't No Mo, and you are opening Grey House very soon. What does it do for you as a designer to just constantly be hopping between very disparate, very different spaces?
I mean, it keeps my acuity on those projects very specific, and it keeps, I think, the momentum of those projects going at a pace that I enjoy very much. They're all at different layers of development, and because Some Like It Hot was being designed during the pandemic and kind of just as we were emerging in our initial phases of, I think, June or July of 2021, I feel like I like having having different things on the landscape, and I know my abilities to like making sure that I'm like doing my best work. And I feel like because I'm working on a couple of different things at the same time, I'm able to kind of keep that development going with a level of acuity and yeah, I guess imagination going. I guess I'm constantly thinking, and I love that. And they both, I mean, when I'm not in the theater, I'm in a museum or a gallery, or just kind of looking at some piece of architecture, walking down the street in New York and being inspired by a Beaux-Arts residence on the Upper East Side, or finding some detail or doorknob. And I feel like this gives me like the amazing palette to play with. And they do, like, I make sure the calendar is like, when I'm able to coordinate that or choreograph my calendar, I am very cognizant of time and being in the room with the work. And that, I think, is the most important thing. Like, that I want to share space while it's being made, and being in that technical rehearsal period on stage is so crucial. So that's ultimately what dictates what I can do and what I cannot do.
Well, we can't wait to see what you can do next, what you come up with next. I'm sure it will be great, but in the meantime, congratulations on these two very well-deserved nominations.
Thank you so
For
much.
everyone out there watching, make sure you stick with us this season. And Scott, thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.